Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Sasser. I'm with Core Systems. I have with me today Chris Rohn, our Director of Operations, and we're about to start our webinar called Save the CRM. And this is a session designed for those who have implemented CRM, might be having some struggles. And our goal here is to give you some ideas and a little bit of strategy to help solve the most common issues that we find in our daily practice. So I'm going to start the slides here in just a second. This is one of the phone calls that we receive on a regular basis. Now, I'll give you some background on Core in just a second, but we help companies either implement their first CRM or help fix the CRM that they have today. And then we also have this group of phone calls that we receive on a regular basis that says, I want to throw this thing out the window. And these are executives who've invested a lot of time and effort into a CRM system, and it's just not producing the results they expected. And so let me share our next screen, because the most common question I receive in the industry is, which CRM system is the best? Well, a little bit about our company. We do strategic CRM implementation. So in addition to the technical pieces, we also do strategy roadmaps, line of business audits, gap analysis, and we'll talk about this as we go along here. But I want you to pay attention to the right-hand side of the screen. Our key partnerships include Sugar CRM, Salesforce.com, and Acton. Acton is a marketing automation system, if you're not familiar. But so the answer I give to people on which CRM system is the best starts with this. 90%, 92% of the features that you find between major CRM systems are the same. So it's now, don't get me wrong, there's always going to be some niche verticals, niche players that do really well in particular industries because they have specialized functionality. But if you're talking about the ones that the analysts track, then the feature, functionality, and potential of the systems are all on a level playing field. So the causes of frustration, underperformance, and the like are usually centered around people, processes, and things, not the technology. In fact, if you survey executives, or if you go Google CRM satisfaction, you'll find that 60 to 80% of the executives who participate in these surveys will say their CRM fails to meet expectations, which would scare the living daylights out of most people. But you have to read past the headline to this little nugget that said, however, a majority said their expectations were not documented. So think of it this way: if someone evaluated the gas mileage of their car with not really an idea of where they were going to drive, how they were going to drive, and how they were actually going to maintain the car, then that's pretty much what you get with CRM feedback these days. It's a lot of times we'll get the phone calls where it's a technology first and we'll figure out everything second type of approach, and in the end result is levels of frustration. So to talk about harmony and what happens when you have an effective CRM implementation is that you have a balance, and that balance resides up and down the org chart. And when you have that balance, one of the most fruitful things that comes out is accurate KPIs. So, your business is not the same as it was 5 years ago, and it will not be the same 5 years from now. And the thing that helps you make the right decisions on how to evolve your business are the KPIs that run your business. And so when you have an effective CRM implementation, management is able to see the metrics that run their business in almost real time with almost little human interaction. And so that's your best case scenario there. Visibility into client relationships on the next slide. And so the most common feature or most common request we get from new clients is, we don't know what happens with our clients after we sell them. Or worse, we don't know a customer is unhappy until it's too late. Well, when you have a CRM, effective CRM implementation, all the key players within your organization can have laser focus on the health of a client relationship. And the easiest way to determine if you have this today is if you have salespeople who walk into an accounting meeting or a client meeting expecting a renewal or an upsell, and they get ambushed with all these technical support or customer support issues, then you know something is out of balance in your CRM. When those two systems are aligned, your salespeople, your executives, your customer support teams, they all have the same level of visibility into the happiness of your clients. Now, we all know that 80% of our revenue is going to come from 20% of our clients. And so this is a key indicator, or this is a key indicator that impacts the revenue and the longevity of your client relationship, and as well as your company. And then we'll skip over management reporting for just a bit, but the line of business user. In an effective CRM environment, the line of business user appreciates the CRM because it helps them do their job. And speaking as a salesperson, in my world, I'm constantly bombarded by questions from those above me in terms of my pipeline, my relationships. Have we talked to this customer? What did you talk about? What are their priorities, and so on and so forth. And when you have your CRM aligned with the job that it's trying to do, then all those questions are on the screen for me. And I'm basically, when I'm on the phone with somebody, I can look at my screen, ask the right questions, and go down the line. Where it breaks down is when the screens don't align with the job, or they become too long, or the line of business user has to put in information that has no bearing on my job whatsoever. And the most common culprit of that is KPI metrics that management wants, but has no impact on the actual line of business user's job performance. And so when we get phone calls about unbalanced implementations, it's usually it was a technology first type of implementation. They skimped on training a lot of times, or they got no input from the line of business user, or they only got input from one level of the organization. So if you only get input from line of business, then management might be frustrated on the visibility they receive. Conversely, if you only get input from management, then the line of business user might be frustrated because their environment is not as relative to their job as it needs to be. So the most common reasons that we find for frustration with CRMs to the point that people are ready to throw them out is usually the CRM and the business strategy are not in alignment. Especially, and this is especially true if you're in a technology field or in a highly competitive market where you're constantly looking for new markets, new marketing tactics, and the like. Your CRM needs to be updated with your updated customer journey. And a lot of our callers will get to a point where they realize, hey, we implemented this in the Bush administration and it has not been updated since. Another culprit that will knock your CRM off balance is excessive KPI tracking, which what that usually involves is people having to do extra work to generate KPIs that have very little value to the business. And then I won't read all the slides here, but the complicated CRM user experience is usually a culprit. And the last one is the rarest. It's if you buy a system that was designed for 5 people and you're now a 50-person company, that can cause you problems, but that's actually the rarest of the problems that we see in the field. So we talked a little bit about how to the problems that we see in the field. We also talked about the benefits of actually having a proper alignment with your system. So what we're going to share with you now is our approach. When someone gives us a call and says, I need help with my CRM, I need to drive user adoption, I need to get management buy-in, I need some other things. This is the approach we take with most of our clients, and this is going to be a very succinct conversation. We're going to show you one example that you can use as a template for other examples within your organization. And as we mentioned at the tail end, I'll show you how to get the email address where you can email us and get a copy of these slides if it would be helpful for you. So surprisingly or not, the first step in saving your CRM is to step away from the technology. So the first 2 steps involve documenting relevant goals and objectives. And I'm talking, what is the goal of the business? If the goal of the business is to provide a technology product to the SMB market to companies that have between 200 and 5,000 employees, and you're selling to the CIO, CTO, then you need that documented along with how you're going to reach them, what's the expected sales activity, what are the expected KPIs from that performance, and have that all mapped out. Again, this has nothing to do with the software. This is strictly your organization's goals and objectives. And then once you have those in play, you start documenting the tactics that we're going to need to take place to actually make those goals attainable. So let me give you an example from a client of ours. Now, I've changed all the names and all that jazz, but the format and the template is easy to follow. So one of our recent clients, this was their CRM roadmap. They're in a very competitive industry where lead routing is incredibly important to driving their business forward. In fact, they have a 72-second workflow. That means if a customer emails or calls in, there's a response and a conversation started within 72 seconds. If it makes it to the 73-second mark, then all heck breaks loose. We're emailing the system's emailing executives, text messages are being sent out. So it's a very high volume environment, quick time frames. And then the lead qualification process is important as well, because in their model, they don't want to spend a lot of time with people who are not going to do business with them. So they have a very rigorous lead qualification process. And then the opportunity automation involves in their world, for a client to become a client, there's actually third parties involved that have to contribute, and they've actually automated every process that it requires to onboard a client onto their service. So again, these are examples of a CRM roadmap. Now, when you document the tactics, and so if you'll remember, I'm going to go back here. Phase one was lead routing. So here's how we mapped out their lead routing steps for inbound email leads. So step one, inbound email. Step two, lead created in CRM. And again, we did this exercise independent of the technology. So we were in a conference room, no laptops. It was just all whiteboard. And this is how we recommend you do it, because otherwise, if you have the technology in play, you have a tendency to change the process that you want to accommodate the technology when it should be the other way around. So step three, lead based on business rules. And before we implemented the solution, their lead routing was manual. And what that means is that I'm going to say John received a lead, and then he would dole the leads out to whatever sales rep he deemed appropriate, which was fine, except if John liked one rep over the other, then one rep was going to get more leads than the other. And when John went to lunch, the leads didn't flow. So we had to come in and actually diagram out what types of actions need to be automated within the system to keep the lead flow going. So you can see this is why you have the goals in place at the high level, because the goal in place was to drive the number of leads higher. It wasn't necessarily around John or the feature or technology. So that allows you to make the decisions that need to be made independent of the software. Because the challenges, and I recommend you always document your challenges along with your goals, is they were losing leads. And to give you an idea what the value of that is, in their business, one lost lead could be $100,000. So losing leads as they came in, if John went on lunch, then those leads were not followed up in 72 seconds. They were followed up within an hour, which by that time they were already in a competitor. And then they didn't want to hire more of peers of John to increase the amount of leads they could handle. So they needed the level of automation to keep their headcount the same, but actually scale up the business. So you'll notice we documented our goals, we documented our challenges, and we documented our tactics. And here's the goals that I just mentioned here. So these were the main goals that were driving the exercise that were the lead routing. So step number one, in my opinion, you document your goals. Step number two, document your challenges. Then step number three, document your tactics. Okay, so I'm going to take a tangent on KPIs for just about 2 slides here, because we get a lot of requests for what KPIs do I need to track, how should I track them, and the like. Well, the most common mistake we see is people either ignoring them altogether or taking the other extreme and going totally overboard. We had one client before we showed up that had over 30 KPIs that they were tracking and making their people doing manual data entry, and we asked them, and we went through an audit and analyzed every one of them. And in the end, there were 5 that were actually relevant to their business. The others were from legacy employees who had come over from other companies who bought their KPIs with them, says we need to track this, and it lost relevancy over time. So most common mistake is tracking too many KPIs. And before you start coming up with a wish list of what KPIs you want to track, you really do need to focus on an environment where they can develop naturally. So developing systems that capture the fundamental data that allows you to generate your KPIs. So for instance, call volume or number of phone calls per rep. I'm using a simple example there. If you want to track that number, make sure your CRM is set up and the employee is trained to actually capture the data that would generate that KPI, and then set up the reporting that allows that information to be easily consumed. And that's usually the step that gets ignored as well. People will track, they'll have the data under CRM, but they won't take the time to actually build the report to show that data because they're so comfortable building Excel spreadsheets, then they put in a manual process. And anytime you put in a manual process with KPIs, number one, that KPI is going to go stale pretty quick. Number two, accuracy comes into play. Number three, if someone's bonus is tied to a KPI, then you put in some, I'm going to use the term loosely, ethical challenges from time to time. So whenever you want a KPI, start at the line of business user and work towards the KPI and how you're going to make that happen. And here are the most common, KPIs. And so if you're looking to revamp your KPIs or start tracking KPIs, these are the ones that should come out of the box of any CRM that you choose. Highly recommend you start with the fundamental out of the box ones and then work your way to specifics. We just did a blog post that we're about to publish on the 9 KPIs that you should track from a sales standpoint, and those will be available on the AtCore blog probably early next week. But in general, I'd like to recommend to all my clients, when you start talking about KPIs, think about your check engine light on your car. When that comes on in my car, that means I usually have to spend money, but it doesn't tell me anything past that. In our context, think of your check engine KPIs as what are the fundamental numbers I need to know that will tell me the health of my business. And so my top 3 check engine KPIs are the customer churn rate. So if you're losing 2 customers for every 1 that you bring on, that's going to be a problem, and that's something you need to manage. Your conversion rates for your sales team, top, middle, and bottom of funnel. And you have to look at all 3 sections, because if you just focus on the top, you're going to be focused on lead gen. And at the end of the day, it's really about revenue that runs your company. So top, middle, and bottom of sales funnel. And then I also recommend that you have a running 12-month baseline of other KPIs so that you can see how your company is trending. Are you trending up? Are you trending down? Where do you need improvement and investment? So those are my top 3 check engine KPIs for you guys. So I'm gonna take a pause here, and I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who's our Director of Operations. He actually leads the team in the field that work hand in hand with our clients in terms of how they marry what's documented in the first 2 steps with the actual reality of what's taking place in the field.
Thank you, Kevin. So yes, Kevin's done a good job of kind of explaining us to this point, documenting those relevant goals and objectives, coming up with tactics to get to those goals and objectives. But one of the things that needs to be considered with every implementation and evolution of the usage of your CRM is making sure that the people on the ground or your line of business users are using the system in a way that's going to meet those goals and objectives over time. So with that being said here, the first thing that we'll typically do is we like to come in and do a visual audit. So what that looks like typically is what we call a shadowing session. So we recommend that you observe 1 or more of your line of business users per department who's going to be using the CRM. And you just want to take a look over a period of time, however long that takes. It's going to be different per business and business model. But you want to do it long enough to get an idea of what the average day-to-day workflow looks like in the CRM usage. And the reason that we want to do that is because we need to find out where are some of the pitfalls that your line of business users are, where are those traps that they're falling into throughout the day. Once you've done that, you can do what we call an audit review. So after you've gotten some insight from sitting with your user or users, you can choose to document and share your findings with that or those users, perhaps their supervisors, and maybe even take that up the food chain to mid or higher level management to kind of talk about some tactics to close those gaps. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. And then the third step, to make sure that everything is operational and efficient, at the end, you'll do, if you like, another audit. And basically what that second audit is going to do is it's going to allow you to make sure that any changes that you make in training or to the CRM to close your gaps has actually met its goals, and to make sure that your line of business users are in line with how management is wanting the CRM to be used. So with that being said, what does that look like in practice? So when you're doing your initial audit, there's some things that you're going to want to document. So the first thing that you'll need to look at is going to be the expected steps. What is it that management has put into place in the workflow of the CRM, and compare that to the actual steps that are being used on a day-to-day basis in the usage of that CRM. You want to find out where a line of business users might be getting confused, or there might be a technical issue with some fields. Could be a myriad of different things, but really you're looking for any types of deviations or workarounds and potential blockers. So what is a blocker? I'll give you some examples. A blocker might be where a line of business user is using the CRM and they come across a field and they can't get that information easily in the CRM, right? Maybe they've got to print a report and go view a number on a report, or worst case scenario, maybe they've got to pick up a phone, go through your IM messaging system internally, or even walk over to somebody's desk to ask a question in order to enter data into that field. Those are going to be your blockers there. So there's also some key phrases that you're going to want to listen for intently as you're doing your audit. All three of these lead to bad data in the CRM, but they're typically going to sound very similar to, well, we have to put something in that field. That just says, that the line of business user doesn't really truly understand what that field is for in the big picture. They just know that something's got to go in. They don't value the field, and so that's going to lead to bad data in the CRM. Or I don't really know what that means. Same thing here. May have the best intentions in the world, but if we're putting the data into the CRM and the line of business users don't truly understand why they're putting information in that field, then inevitably you're going to have bad data in that or those fields. And then worst of all is going to be, we've always done it that way. Now, this is the worst one because this is a really key indicator that maybe the CRM is not keeping up with the evolution of the business. We typically see this when you've got CRM line of business users. You have employee churn over time. You have the old guard has put in some fields or some processes in place in the CRM. They've since left the company, and in perpetuity, their legacy is workflows that no longer really matter to the business, but we're still wasting time putting that data into the CRM. And again, it's a tradition at that point, but it doesn't really serve a purpose. We've always done it that way. Means it might be time to take a fresh look at what we're actually putting in. So once we've got an idea of where the problems are, we want to basically start documenting that gap analysis. And your gap analysis is essentially saying, this is what we expect, this is what we're observing, and coming up with an idea as to how to approach closing the gap, right? The ideal intent is for your line of business users to be able to operate quickly in the CRM and for management to get the most insight out of it without a lot of wasted time and effort throughout the documentation or data input process. Your next step is going to be creating a strategy for closing those gaps. So typically at a high level, what we typically look at to solve that problem, it could be twofold, it could be onefold, it really kind of depends on the scenario, but essentially you're going to be looking at training, or you're going to be looking at maybe making some further enhancements to the CRM to really get it optimized. Maybe we've got to remove some fields, rename some fields. Maybe we've got to change some relationships between different modules. Those types of things there. And again, it could be a mixture of both. So kind of further reiterate that, the steps, changes to the CRM UI, we just kind of talked about, but some key things to remember there. You want to make any type of changes to the CRM, especially the more users that you have within it. You want to make those changes slowly. So you really want to document what's going to give me the best bang for the buck as far as any changes that need to be made. Start with those first, and then make changes slowly over time. You really don't want a lot of change management. That typically will cause confusion amongst the team, and again, it can lead to bad data into your CRM. Now, the other step, again, is the business is constantly evolving. So, if you're selling soap, it may not evolve as fast as if you're selling a SaaS service. It depends on how disruptive your market is. But depending on the type of business that you're in and the environment, you're going to want to schedule reviews on a regular basis just to make sure that the CRM is always aligned with your business's goals and also with your line of business users' usage of that CRM. And the last thing is going to be that additional training, which we kind of mentioned a moment ago. But basically, something to keep in mind with your training, you want to keep the training sessions very, very focused on the slow changes that you're making. You don't want to really take a lot of time with the training. So the best practice here is going to be 20-minute sessions. You schedule it at regular intervals as you make those changes, rather than taking time out of the whole team's day and then going through 30 or 40 different field changes or workflow changes at a time. I'll turn it back over to Kevin here to wrap it up.
All right. Thank you, Chris. So as we work with clients of all sizes, we've used this formula in startups. We've used this formula with Fortune 500 companies that were global. And regardless of the size of the organization there's great value in knowing what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then aligning the tactics to it. So we strongly recommend that you take a look at this approach. It's usually a lot more cost effective to do this approach than it is to put in a new system. No one has ever been happy doing a data migration from one system to another. So we are like Dr. Phil in that regards. We try to save the relationship between the incumbent and the client. But once you go through this, make this a part of your regular cadence of your business operation. So it can be tied to an annual event. It could be tied to shifts in the marketing strategy. But keeping your internal systems that are supposed to drive those processes that manage your client relationships aligned with your business is one of the most soundest investments you can do to grow your business. Now, as is the nature of webinars these days, we only have about 45 minutes, and this is a session that we could go on for hours and days to talk about. So feel free to email me directly. There's my email address. I promise you'll be talking to me directly, no spam or anything along those lines, and basically more than happy to answer any of your questions or share our expertise in this matter, because our ultimate goal at AdCore is to make everyone's CRM just as effective as it possibly can be.